What's up, Rockstars? Today I'm going to be talking about Massive Darkness 2 and all the details that we know leading into the Kickstarter. That way we can kind of go over everything and know kind of the structure of the game moving on into the campaign. I'll actually be reviewing the campaign and talking about the structure of the campaign on Kickstarter in a video later this week. But for now, let's go ahead and get started in the actual game details. As always, I'd like to get started with a quick thank you to my patrons and YouTube members. It is through their generous support that much of this channel is funded, and that is because I do not take money from the game companies that I am critiquing, so that I can stay fully and truly honest and independent with all of you. So if you appreciate that, then I hope that you appreciate the wonderful contributions that they make. If you're not part of that and you want to be, there's links down below. Additionally, there's links to merch and Amazon. You can share, you can like, you can comment, you can subscribe. All of that's super helpful. And regardless of anything, I'm happy that you're here. Now let's go ahead and get started in what we know so far. And again, this is just covering the game details. This is from playthrough. This is from the articles. This is from Facebook posts. Any kind of information I could gather is what I used here. Now, there is a rule book. I am assuming it will be posted on the campaign page. I'm filming this the night before it goes live. I don't have access to the rule book. Come On doesn't really talk to me. I can only imagine why. But however, I have tried to reach out to them, and hopefully I can start getting some more information and they can see the benefit that that will be to you guys. So I hope that's possible, but if not, we'll just do it how we're doing it now, and I'll just scurry and scrounge for information. Hopefully, though, this will be useful. I know it was useful for me to kind of gather, especially all the different changes. And a playthrough on Quackalope's page, I'm going to link to that below. It's actually quite useful. I'm imagining it'll be on the Kickstarter campaign page as well. But if not, go ahead and check that out if you have 3.5 hours to spend. It's actually kind of interesting to see, especially at least the first half of that. Though I'm going to cover a lot of that, so you could probably almost skip the first half of the video or the first quarter of it or whatever, because I'm just going to be summarizing it. All right, getting into it. First thing they're doing is they're streamlining a lot of it. Now, it's kind of a Starcadia Quest scenario where they are making some quite drastic changes, though I think they're actually changing a lot more than Starcadia Quest did to Arcadia Quest. For instance, right now you do one roll for an attack, so both the attack die and the monster die are rolled together. That means that there's no counterattack phase or anything like that. Instead, you see their attack or their ability and then your attack or your abilities, and you just kind of combine those. Now, the monster dice do control both their abilities and their counterattacks. So you'll see like some claw marks, that's their counterattack, but additionally, there's other symbols on there, and depending on the mob or whoever it is you're fighting, they can interact with those as well. So it's not something that may always happen. If you're calling Massive Darkness 1, they would just pretty much have an ability, and now it's kind of tied to these dice. So a little bit more random there, and that's going to kind of be a theme for a few things here, so let's keep an eye on that. Spawning has been simplified as well. It's now always the same. You spawn as many enemies in the mob as there are players, period. And then, of course, there's one die per mob. So it's that many die, that many mob units. So you'll always be fighting, if you're playing a 4-player game, 4 of every mob. Doesn't matter the mob or anything like that. That's a little bit less variety, obviously. That means you can't have weak enemies that there's a lot of, or a lot of enemies, or a few enemies that are stronger. Instead, they'll always be kind of generalized and streamlined a bit to just kind of be the same at 4 kind of thing. So that's maybe a little bit bummer for me, but I guess it makes it quicker. I don't know how much time people were wasting trying to figure out what 2 times the amount of players is. Perhaps that's difficult math for some. I'm not sure. I wouldn't want to be in their party if it is, I suppose. But whatever, that's, I guess, streamlined. It may have been streamlined more for their balancing needs than for our gameplay variety. And of course, I would like a more balanced game most days of the week, though variety is obviously nice as well. Okay, moving on from that. Leveling now just gives straight bonuses. So in general, you're just gaining health and you're gaining mana. So it would be like +1 health, +1 mana, or something like that. The variety comes from your ability cards. We'll get into that later. But for leveling, it's literally just kind of at the end of each round. Did you get enough XP to level? Bam, you got those. Good for you. Gear now comes in 4 tiers. So there'll just be common, rare, epic, and legendary. That's it. There's none of those like level 5s and stuff like that kind of get a little crazy. It's now kind of consolidated into those 4: common, rare, epic, and legendary. So you notice they're streamlining some things and adding variety in other things. And I don't know exactly what the rhyme or reason is for that, except that I feel like they kind of took a look at this and just designed pretty much a whole new game. Definitely a new edition worth, it earned its number 2 title. It's very, well, except it almost didn't, because it's not like Massive Darkness 1. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the changes here and some of the added variety as well. Each class in Massive Darkness 2 has ability cards that they get to build up and customize. And those ability cards will be different and be used differently depending on the class, but each one will be totally different. And that's because each class has its own game mechanic. Now, at the end of the video, I'm going to be talking about the specifics of those mechanics so that you guys can kind of have a sense of what that variety is and that asymmetry is. But for now, let's just move on. Bosses are now here as well as roaming monsters, and bosses act a little differently because they have their own special tile, and when you get to them, it's pretty much a boss battle at that point. So the rest of the level kind of stops mattering, and you are focused on the boss in that boss room at that point. Maps also have more on them. So the map tiles look very, very different. So now they have spawn and treasure icons on them. So when you go and open up a room, you see that there's a spawn and 2 treasures. So you do the 2 treasures and spawn, and then you're done. And that's really it. You kind of pull a thing that says, oh, you do monsters at a tier higher if possible, or something like that, which is, again, very massive darkness of them. But otherwise, the icons are just right there, kind of built into the map tiles themselves. Additionally, they have more stuff, like they have spike traps and stuff like that, so there are terrain issues that you kind of have to look at, as well as the light and dark. Additionally, you do not transmute anymore. If you recall Massive Darkness 1, you could combine items to get a better version of an item or a better tier from an item, and instead you can still do that, but only at a forge, which will kind of be a token that's on a map depending on the scenario. So you have to go to a specific location to do that. And then lastly, you'll notice very quickly that the light and dark areas the contrast is way, way amped up. Again, I'm not sure exactly why this was. I guess some people had some confusion around where it was dark and where it was light. I never did in my many, many playthroughs, but I guess it was, for some reason, they wanted to really do that. So it looks quite different. It's very noticeable if it's light or dark. Dark is very gray, whereas in Massive Darkness it seemed to be a little bit more purple. And perhaps that's what it is, but I think the contrast is honestly higher as well. And that kind of leads into kind of a cartoony look to it. So let's actually talk about that right now. Massive Darkness 2 has a different style than Massive Darkness 1, sort of. Maybe a different a different twist on the same style, I guess you could say. So Massive Darkness 1 was fairly lighthearted and fairly silly in its art, but it was very much grounded in more or less D&D stuff. And Massive Darkness 2 is farther from that. So you have imps with huge heads that are all squat. You have, angels that have like hexagonal Deus Ex Machina kind of technology cube heads going on. Everything seems to be a little bit more exaggerated and just a little bit more cartoony. Now, some people are going to like that, some people are not going to like that. The only thing I'm going to note is, looking at the playthrough, they attacked some succubus. And I think it's very odd to have succubus and cartoony art style in the same thing. Because part of it seems like it's a little bit more family friendly, like the succubus are the most well-dressed succubus I've ever seen. But at the same time, you still have a succubus, and God forbid your kid ask what that is. It's kind of at odds perhaps a little bit with its theme. So I want to headbutt the demon's head off, but the demon's head is kind of cutesy now. So is what it is, but that art style from the board is pervasive across all the items and all the character designs and art and all that kind of stuff. Definitely on a lighter note, the Massive Darkness one does not take itself seriously by the looks of it. Okay, now from now on, I'm just going to be talking about some random stuff, just oddball things that I've noted that you might want to note as well, and then we'll get on into the character class mechanics. So, number 1, at the beginning of each turn, you can pick your player order, so each round can be a different player order you guys can discuss. Very Zombicide-like in that sense, which I actually am I prefer more open-ended player turns. So for me, that's a good thing, but that's something that you'll have to kind of go in knowing that you'll be discussing a lot at the start of each round on who's going to do what, if the Paladin's going to go first and buff people, and then or whatever it might be. Additionally, the shadow area not only affects your kind of shadow ability that each character had, even for Massive Darkness 1, but you get a shadow die. And that shadow die can add attacks, it can add defense, it can also proc your ultimate. And so we work on it correct when we read earlier that the ultimate is a random thing that you do. You roll the die and it randomly happens. It's not really something you necessarily control, though you can try to do your rerolls on that die and such. The Massive Darkness 2 core box will have 10 one-shot scenarios in it and no campaign mode. Instead, CMON will be offering a campaign expansion day 1. So today, if you're watching this the day I launched it, if you go to their campaign, you will see a expansion for the campaign, which makes those 10 then be able to run in as a story, and it will come with its own kind of rule set. And that campaign mode has been developed from the ground up instead of something that's slapped on at the end like it was in the Massive Darkness 1 Kickstarter. So that's good news for anybody who likes to kind of slowly build up as opposed to kind of ramp up. Really, the one-shots are very similar to Zombicide, if you're familiar with that. If you go from blue to red in Zombicide, you get that huge ramp up each and every single time, but it resets each time, which worked out great. But for those that want kind of the slow churn of a campaign, you can get that now as well. Additionally, and I did confirm this, that they will be offering plastic trays for their kind of player boards. So that's huge. That's awesome. Part of it's a partnership, I believe, that CMON has with another company they announced on their website. But essentially, we're going to be actually having some nice components by the looks of it. So that's good news. All right, now let's talk about the class mechanics. And I want to start by saying that I don't have two of them. I don't have the Shaman or the Ranger. The reason I don't have them is because, again, I don't have the rule book, and they were not explained in the playthrough that I saw, therefore I can't speak on them. It also was not mentioned in the article that CMON posted. So I'm wondering if perhaps they're still fine-tuning that and it's not quite ready for the limelight yet. They might still be kind of developing how those two mechanics work for those two classes. But we can start with the Wizard. So the Wizard has an amulet, which is this round kind of disc-shaped amulet, and then this spinning arrow in the middle. Now that arrow, you can spend mana to kind of spin it to point to a certain spell. There are 4 spells around it. In fact, the spells are for 1 mana, you get 1 defense. For 1 mana, you get 1 move. For 1 mana, you get 1 attack. Or for 2 mana, you can heal 3. So those are kind of your basic ones. However, your ability cards or your spell cards can be laid on top of that, and that kind of further enhances them. And it can also customize how you play as a wizard. If you want to heal more, you can cover up one of your attack spaces with a secondary heal or a third heal. Otherwise, if you don't want to heal and you want to go Glass Cannon and do all attacks, you can then cover up the heal and do that. Otherwise, you can maybe just upgrade and kind of be a well-balanced wizard. The choice is ultimately up to you, but as you can see, the mechanics here do kind of change and how you play certain characters, because no other character is going to play quite like that. The Paladin, alternatively, has 3 kind of auras that they can place underneath their other heroes or companions. And they are blue, red, and green, and that's kind of an arbitrary color distinction. Really what's important is they have the blue, red, and green, and then underneath that columns that they can add their ability cards to that enhance that buff. So that whoever you give that buff to, if they get the red, they get everything that you've put underneath the red. So you can customize different sets or combos of buffs to them that can do anything from added abilities to just increasing attack to increasing movement, all sorts of other things. And additionally, they are the only class that has a double-sided ability card. So you can actually kind of explode that buff to be even stronger, so you can flip it over to its other side, and then it becomes a much better enhancement to the people. So you can kind of choose how you assign those out each round and just kind of build up your buffs in that sense. Compare that now to the rogue, who has a kind of a bag building mechanic. So at the start of each of the rogue's turn, they will draw 3 tokens out of their bag and then place them face up. And they'll have something like plus move or move 2 and then make an attack or something like that. And they, regardless of the action they want to do, whether they want to trade or interact with an item or anything like that, they need to flip one of those tokens over. So that represents their 3 actions. They cannot take an action without flipping over a token. However, that means that they can combo it. So if you plan on moving, you're going to want to flip over the +1 movement, and now you can move farther. Or if you were going to attack enemies in front of you anyway, you flip over that 2 movement, and suddenly you got 2 free movement, and you can do an attack, as opposed to spending all of your actions to go and do that. Now you just spent 1 action. Additionally, there are enhancements you can add to the bag, so you can add like poison tokens and a lot of different other things to kind of customize how you can do that. So you're kind of randomly drawing them out and then trying to combo them with perhaps actions you were wanting to take, or perhaps changing your actions to better match your options and the tokens. Additionally, there are player skills that can obviously come into effect here. So for instance, one of the rogues, the one that comes in the core box, their ability is in the shadow they get to draw an extra token. Now because your tokens are your actions, that means they get a whole extra action if they're in the shadow. They have 4 actions now instead of 3. So it's a pretty nuanced way of kind of interacting as a rogue, where you kind of have these different points of opportunity. Finally, we have the Berserker. Now, the Berserker has a way of essentially any damage done to the Berserker, the health tokens are actually put on their board up to 7. And this secondary board is their stance board, and they can have either the Blood Rage stance, the Reckless stance, or the Provoke stance. Now, each one of those stances are going to provide a buff. For instance, the Blood Rage allows them to reroll die by using HP tokens. So these HP tokens, they can then expend and remove to actually do special things like reroll or something if they're in the Blood Rage. Or if they're in the Reckless, they can do it to gain a movement point. Or for Provoke, they can gain they can remove an HP token to gain a defense. Now these can obviously be enhanced with their ability cards as well, so that when you provoke, you do a whole bunch of other stuff and you become more tanky. And you can move between these stances throughout the game, so you can kind of pick and choose depending on the circumstances if you want to go more attack, more support, or more defense. Now, for instance, the Berserker in the core box, Gaia, she can take on a wound, and then that gets her an attack in her light ability. So if she's in the light tile, she can do that. Now, because she gets an attack, but then that token goes on the board, and if she's in the Blood Rage, then she can actually add a reroll to that. So she can attack and a reroll with 1 health. Additionally, like her Shadow mode, she can actually gain 3 wounds, so they move to the board, but then she heals 3 too. So she just essentially made 3 hit points that she can now, tokens that she can now use to do as she wishes. And again, all of these ability cards are enhanced, and that's really replacing the kind of class book that you saw, booklet that you saw in Massive Darkness 1. All your, a lot of, the classes act a certain way because they all have this set mechanic, but you can customize within that how you're acting. So you can be a Berserker that's more, aggressive or more defensive, or especially with like the wizard and how they're changing things as well. If you remember the kind of the rows of abilities that you could get, it's fairly similar from Massive Darkness 1, just in I think a better way. Now, what I would like to hear from you is what you think about a lot of these changes. Do you think this is good or not? Me personally, if I was to give a king's decree here, I would say that seeing the mechanics of the classes and really actually has me a lot more excited about it than I was. I didn't really like the cartoony art style, and I still don't. It's just not my cup of tea. I tend to like more gritty and dark things, or at least more mature things. I don't really like too many lighthearted things. And it seems very silly. Seeing imps that are chibi styled is definitely not something I'm into, for instance. However, gameplay is king, and the gameplay looks quite good. It looks like they've improved quite a lot. There is some randomness, like I'm still not a fan of the random ultimate. However, it looks like classic Massive Darkness. So if you want a game where you can just go into a group of enemies and decimate them and take some loot, this is probably the game for you, just like Massive Darkness was as well, except now we are theoretically getting a better campaign mode as well. I was a fan of the one-shots myself, so I don't mind, but I would again love to hear what you have to say. Is this something you're going to jump in where you don't have Massive Darkness 1? Are you interested in the upgrade pack? I would love to hear your thoughts about it, so be sure to share them down below. I'll be in the comment section as well, responding, and kind of we'll talk about it, especially once the campaign is live. I'd love to hear what your thoughts, and I'll be seeing what you're seeing right alongside you. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope this helped to prepare you for the Kickstarter, or at least know whether or not maybe you want to actually participate or not. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.